Hello, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We are glad to have you here. My name is Gardner with the Mississippi Museums. We're in our home, the Craig H. Neilsen Auditorium here in the Museum of Mississippi History and the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. We're also streaming live on both Facebook and YouTube, where you can see any of our History's Lunch programs at any time. We hope that you'll join us this Sunday for The American Revolution, a film by Ken Burns, Sarah Bostein, and David Schmidt at 2 p.m. Sunday, October 12th, right here in the Craig H. Neilsen Auditorium, the two Mississippi Museums. This is a 45-minute... My mic is going. This is a 45-minute preview of the 6-part, 12-hour documentary that presents the story of the men and women of the revolutionary generation, their fight for independence, and the birth of the United States. And this program is presented in partnership with the Mississippi Public Broadcasting. Let's try that. Can you hear me? Testing. There we go. All right. Thank you for bearing with me. But today, we are excited to welcome Sally Wolff-King to present her latest book, William Faulkner in Holly Springs. Wolff-King earned her doctorate in English from Emory University, where she has taught and served in administration for 45 years. She has published 4 books about Southern literature and several books about the history of Emory University. One of her earlier books about William Faulkner, Ledgers of History, William Faulkner, An Almost Forgotten Friendship, and An Antebellum Plantation Diary, has been called one of the most exciting literary finds in recent history and a major discovery in Faulkner scholarship. So if you will, please help me welcome Ms. Sally Wolff-King and her presentation today, Holly Springs as a Source for William Faulkner's Fiction.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here. I'm an Arkansan by birth, and I grew up there in Dumas, Arkansas, and it's just right up the road, so I feel like I'm home. And so thank you for that, and thanks to everybody for coming out today. So my book, let's see if I can get the right slide up. My book is titled William Faulkner in Holly Springs, and it is a follow-up to the earlier book, Ledgers of History. After that book, I decided to do some more research in Holly Springs to see what else I could find. The first book got started when I met an Emory alumnus who was from Holly Springs, Mississippi, and had an old antebellum diary. When I looked at it, I thought that Faulkner had drawn from it and confirmed that Faulkner had seen the book. So after that, I started looking around more in Holly Springs to see what else I could find that had to do with Faulkner, because it seemed like he had been there. And so those are the two that I've worked on the most recently. So this book focuses on the impact that Faulkner's Holly Springs, Mississippi experiences had on his writings. So after spending time in Holly Springs and talking to people, I decided that Faulkner had not only been to Holly Springs numerous times, but had worked some of what he found there into his stories and novels. And Holly Springs was a source for some of his major work. Not the only source, but a source. Faulkner depicted in his stories and novels some of what he saw and heard in Holly Springs. So I'm going to talk to you about that today and outline some of what I think he did with what he found there. So people have already asked me, Who cares that William Faulkner was in Holly Springs? Well, probably not too many people, but Faulkner scholars care about where Faulkner was at every minute. And so if what I've done is showing that he was there numerous times and also drew from what he saw there, then that is a new point. But especially we, the Arkansans and Mississippians who know the Faulkner area well, have some interest in why he was there. In Holly Springs, Faulkner attended local events and dinners with friends, hunted with friends, changed trains at the depot, visited his bootlegger. He had one in Oxford too, but he had one in Holly Springs. He had one, he needed them too. Attended a horse show, picked up his stepdaughter from the Mississippi Synodical College, which had a high school program, chatted with the Chancery clerk, and received DUI and speeding tickets. So those are some, not all, of the things that I discovered that Faulkner did while he was there. I talked to people in town, 25 citizens, and they told me these things. They knew that he had been there, and they all said these things. Yes, he would come into town on the train from Oxford and change trains to go to Memphis. And while he was in the train station, he would have lunch at the cafe, and so forth and so on. So I talked to various people, and they would say, oh, well, you really need to talk to so-and-so. And so then I would have a new name. So one day somebody said, well, you really should talk to Flick Ash. And that's quite a name. And so I went to find Mr. Ash at the Chancery Clerk's office in Holly Springs. And he was a character. He was a very nice person, but he was a character. He wore a 10-gallon hat, and anyway. So I went to see him, and I said, I hear that you knew Mr. Faulkner. And he said, yes, Mr. Faulkner used to come into the courthouse to talk to me. And I said, well, why did Mr. Faulkner want to talk to you? And he said, well, actually, I talked and he listened. I thought that was a significant moment because it confirms what we already knew about Faulkner, that he liked to listen. He liked to listen to the stories that the old people would tell around the campfire. He was seen numerous times standing on courthouse steps, listening to people. And so I really liked what Mr. Ash gave me. It was, I don't think he read 20 novels in order to figure out that Mr. Faulkner listened. He heard Mr. Faulkner come in, asked to speak to him, and then listen to what he had to say. So I thought that was significant. This is the dining room at Walter Place. That's one of the antebellum homes in Holly Springs. Holly Springs has a lot of antebellum homes, and I found out from the owner of Walter Place, Georgia Lynn is her name, that Faulkner and his wife Estelle had dinner there with their Holly Springs friend Ann Walter Fern. And Georgia Lynn was willing to allow me to interview her and get more details about this dinner. And also she sent me this photo. And I like it because it shows what the dining room at Walter Place looked like when Mr. Faulkner was there, and how some people lived, how Ann Walter Fern lived, and what it might have been like to be at dinner at her table. And this is McCarroll Place in Holly Springs, Mississippi. The house was owned by the McCarroll Francisco family for 5 generations, and the home of the Francisco McCarroll families. This was the place where the old antebellum ledger books were located for so long that I argued in Ledgers of History that Faulkner had seen and drawn from. And this is Mary Louisa Baugh, nicknamed Ludi. She lived at McCarroll Place during the Civil War and etched her name on the window pane. I believe that Faulkner saw her name there and wrote about it. So I'm going to try to detail that out for you a little bit. So here is a photo of Ludi's etching of her single name on the glass window pane in her bedroom at McCarroll Place. Apparently, she etched her name with the diamond ring. And this is what Faulkner wrote in Intruder in the Dust. A young girl's single name, written by her own hand, into the glass with a diamond. So, already folks have said, oh, well, there are other etchings in glass windows in Oxford and other places around. It wasn't all that common, but there are some other examples. How do you know Faulkner saw this one? And also, the girl's single name, I think, is important in answering that question. So we'll try to answer it. Faulkner depicted himself looking at the etching from outside or in reverse. So if he were standing outside looking at Ludi's etching, it would appear in reverse. And according to Dr. Francisco, Faulkner said that he always liked to view the etching in reverse. Sometimes 2 or 3 times a year, he would go up onto the gallery to look at it, cryptic now in reverse, not for a sense of the past, but to realize the eternality, the deathlessness, and changelessness of youth. So that is one comment one statement that Faulkner put in his novel. And he, I think, is depicting himself. So I think this is an autobiographical moment for Faulkner where he depicts himself going up onto the gallery porch to look at the etching, and he sees it in reverse because he's outside looking in. Also, Ludi was weak and ill. Faulkner focuses on her frailty and her worklessness. And again, I had been told about Ludi that she was frail. She wasn't well. She wasn't even well enough to do housework. And this is what Faulkner described. The frail girl, not only incapable of, or at least excused from, helping her mother cook, but even of drying the dishes, inscribing at some moment the fragile and indelible signature of her meditation on one of the panes of it, the window, her frail and workless name scratched by a diamond ring in her frail and workless hand. So there were other folks around. There's one lady named Jane T. Cook, who etched her name in a window pane in Oxford. She was also not particularly well. Ludi died young, so did Jane. So how do we know that Faulkner wasn't writing about Jane? Well, to me, one of the impressive parts of this description on the screen right now is that Faulkner took exactly Ludi's impairment. It wasn't just that she wasn't well, it was that she was so frail she couldn't work and she couldn't really help her mother even dry the dishes. So Faulkner seems to have pulled from real life, from Ludi's real disability, her particular disability, in his description of her. And also Jane T. Cook, remember Ludi's single name that Faulkner described in Intruder in the Dust, her single name. And Jane T. Cook is not a single name. It's 3 names, or at least 2, if you don't count the T. And so I think we start to see a pattern that Faulkner used particular details in his depiction of Ludi. The old glass etching, conquering time and distance, speaks across the vast instantaneous intervention from the long, long time ago. So we start to hear that sonorous quality that Faulkner was so good at, and what he's doing with Ludi's etching. He didn't just mention it, he's taking it, he's using it, he's trying to depict something specific. And he, of course, he's going to talk about time and distance. Those are two of his big topics. Across the instantaneous intervention, wow, from the long, long time ago. So the past is being dragged into the present. His view is that the past was never dead. It was not even past, that the past influences the present. So this is one of the illustrations of that idea of his. All you had to do was look at it a while. All you have to do is remember it. That is the etching. All you have to do is look at it a while. All you have to do is remember it. And indeed, William Faulkner did. So, how do I know that it was Ludi that Faulkner talked about in Requiem for a Nun and described in such glorious terms? Well, I used different scholars' tools. I used close textual analysis, eyewitness testimony, communal memory, autobiographical portrait, and ephemera to link Ludi's signature in glass to Faulkner's novel. In the same novel, Faulkner describes host and guest or stranger. So what is that about? What does he mean by that? And scholars have thought about it and written about it, and several have tried to figure out what he meant with these words. But I've decided that host may refer to the annual Holly Springs pilgrimage, when the town opens opens antebellum homes to visitors. Townspeople host and invite visitors to go in and listen to the old stories. Faulkner may have visited the home of his friend who was a host. And in the middle of the night one night, I realized, I think I'm right, not sure, that this is what Faulkner was referring to with host, guest, and stranger. And then, talking to people in Holly Springs, I discovered that the hosts and hostesses for the Holly Springs pilgrimage wore these tags. And so each host would have a tag that said host, and each hostess one that said hostess. And so I've been told that Faulkner visited McCarroll Place during pilgrimage, that he was well aware of the pilgrimage that goes on there every year, and he could easily have seen the host and hostess tags. And this is Mrs. Ruth Francisco in Holly Springs, Mississippi, ready for pilgrimage. So I think it's my theory. I can't prove it absolutely. I wish I could call Mr. Faulkner and say, was it the Holly Springs host and hostess tags that triggered your imagination, and that's why you put so much about them in your book? But I can't. So it's my theory. I'm suggesting it as a possible meaning that Faulkner drew from his time in Holly Springs. Also, there are similarities between the McCarroll sisters and the fictional sisters, Ellen and Rosa Coldfield, in his novel Absalom, Absalom. And this is one of the sisters. I think she's a possible model for Rosa Coldfield in Absalom, Absalom. And you have to remember that Faulkner described in that novel a woman with lace at wrists and throat. And I'm sure it was common to have lace at wrists and throat, but here we have an old photo that was on display at McCarroll Place during Faulkner's lifetime, and he easily could have seen this photo And if you ask Faulkner, as someone did, to identify certain people for Absalom, he would say, I myself would have to go page by page to see just how much I drew from family annals that I had listened to, from these old undefeated spinster aunts that children of my time grew up with. Well, okay, you can say to me, yeah, but how do you know the family annals weren't his own? And how do you know that the aunts that he listened to weren't his? Well, I can't prove it that the family annals that he's talking about here were those from McCarroll Place, but they could have been. And the undefeated spinster aunts is interesting because Faulkner's aunts were married. So he didn't have spinster aunts. So he's talking, I think, he's talking about drawing from other annals, from spinster aunts who were not his, but they were alive during his growing up time. So I think that Faulkner is describing, likely describing the McCarroll Place ledgers and the spinster aunts who lived in McCarroll Place. Wish I could call them and say, is this what you had in mind? But I can't. So I'm suggesting it. It's part of my theory. And I'll leave it to you to see if you're convinced. And this is Strickland Place, right next door to McCarroll Place. At some point, I said, well, who lived next door? Oh, well, Miss Pearl lived next door. Miss Pearl Strickland. Well, tell me more about Miss Pearl. Well, Miss Pearl was very beautiful. Oh, well, tell me more about Miss Pearl. And so I got to know from interviews more about Miss Pearl Strickland. And she is quite winsome in this photo, I think. If she is a model for one of the characters in The Sound and the Fury, then that really gives us a lovely idea of what Faulkner may have had in mind when he created his favorite and famous heroine. And there's Miss Pearl as an old woman at the gates of Strickland Place, and those stone, I think they were brick towers, are pretty impressive. So I brought that just to show you a little bit about what Strickland Place was like. And as an older woman, 50 years old, Pearl married a German national who'd immigrated to America, Gerard Badeau. And there are some similarities between Pearl and Caddy Compson in The Sound and the Fury, Faulkner's most famous novel. So I want to detail that out for you a little bit. So Caddy and Pearl, both were older women, both had a German dalliance, an at-home wedding, a mammy named Gibson, 3 brothers, one of whom was slow-minded. So those are quite a few already ways that the two of them are similar. Caddy's and Pearl's ages also are similar. Caddy is 48 in 1940 when she vanishes in Paris and is last seen with a German officer. Pearl is over 50. Now, let me get my notes out because this has got numbers in it. Pearl was over 50 at the time of her marriage, but research suggests that her stated age was lower. She was born about 1869, according to the 1870 and 1880 census records, but by the time she and Gerard appear in the 1930 census as a married couple, she claims to be the same age as he, 50 in 1930. In 1926, then, she was probably admitting to about 46 or 47, but was in fact 57. I know, and it has other implications. But in any case, the age she stated corresponds closely with Caddy's age when she vanishes on the arm of a German officer in his last scene in Paris, and that age is 48. So I think that's impressive that their ages were almost exactly the same. Hers in real life, and Faulkner gave that age to his famous heroine. And also Ruth LeGrand Strickland. It has come to me that she also may be partially a role model for Caddy Compson. So I think there are two women across from McCarroll Place and Strickland Place that Faulkner seems to have drawn characteristics from and other qualities. So Ruth LeGrand Strickland as a young girl in the swing at McCarroll Place. When I saw this picture, I almost fell off the chair because one of Faulkner's most famous images of Caddy Compson as a young girl is in the swing. And, you know, at first she's a young, beautiful girl in the swing. Later, she kisses a boy in the swing. Later, somebody finds a condom under the swing. And we start to get images of a woman becoming sexual. And then, of course, she is pregnant out of wedlock and has to get married. Her mother takes her to Indiana on quote-unquote vacation, but the implication is she's looking for an abortion, and then she's hastily married. Ruth LeGrand Strickland had a similar pattern. But when I saw this picture of the young, beautiful girl in the swing, I couldn't help but wonder, is this the child that Faulkner saw or knew, either the picture or knew the real girl, that inspired his image of Caddy in the swing? The young Caddy Compson and Ruth LeGrand Strickland. Each is a beautiful girl in a swing who matures into an alluring young woman. Both have multiple love relationships, move away, are associated with Indiana, and divorce. Caddy goes so far away that she is never seen again except in a photograph. So Indiana is important to both stories, the real story and the fictional story, because Ruth went to Indiana and got married in the back seat of a car. Unplanned, I think. And I'm sure her mother was thrilled. And something similar happens to Caddy. Her mother takes her to, she's pregnant, and her mother takes her to Indiana, to French Lick, Indiana. Great name. But is a town with a salt bath, and she's supposed to be going for the baths, but she seems really to be looking for an abortion. And both Caddy and Ruth are quickly married. So that seems to me to be a striking commonality between the two. For Faulkner to have chosen Indiana for Caddy to go to in search of a husband and an abortion, why did he pick Indiana? Why not Illinois or Ohio or Missouri? So it's hard to explain where he came up with Indiana unless he knew the girl next door and her situation. So I've concluded that both Ruth and Pearl Strickland may have been sources for Faulkner's most famous heroine. Ruth Francisco and her son Edgar Wiggin Francisco III are here at the gate between McCarroll Place and Strickland Place. You can see the gate. I think they took this picture because it snowed that day, and it snows so rarely around here that they were frolicking in the snow. And in these pictures, Edgar Francisco Jr., Faulkner's friend, at the gate between McCarroll Place and Strickland Place. And you can see McCarroll Place here and a little bit of Strickland Place right there. And you can see how close the houses were to each other. In this picture, Strickland Place towers more visibly above everything else. A little bit of McCarroll Place is there, and there is the child who apparently was underfoot when William Faulkner came to visit. And the other point about the houses being close together is that in The Sound and the Fury, Faulkner describes the children traversing back and forth between the houses. And Caddy and Benji are always unlocking the gate at the fence as they go from one place to another. So several houses in Holly Springs. It's our interviewees, the folks I talked to in Holly Springs, said that several houses were linked to Faulkner's story, A Rose for Emily. This is one of them. This is the Smith house, and Louise Cathy Smith was a young lady, Faulkner's age group, in Holly Springs, and several people mentioned to me that she dated Faulkner. And so I asked one lady why they didn't marry, and she said he was not to her liking. And I thought that was really a Mississippi way to put it. He was not to her liking. But her house, the Smith house, does have that eerie, haunting look about it, at least in this photo, and that is befitting the story. And the other house that came to my attention may have been a source for A Rose for Emily is Gray Gables, which has these incredible red, rose-colored glass windows, and they were imported. They were in place during Faulkner's day. He could have seen them, and maybe the rose-colored glass windows were what he needed to envision the rose theme that's so prominent in A Rose for Emily. The Holly Springs Depot is also important. According to numerous people, Faulkner came up from Oxford on the train to Holly Springs, changed trains, and went to Memphis, and from there, other places beyond. According to interviewees, he visited and then depicted the depot. So he visited, he changed trains there, and there was a cafe there. He had lunch at the cafe. He also, I was told, had lunch at a cafe called Mackey's in Holly Springs. When he had lunch at the Depot Cafe in Holly Springs, he may have overheard this statement that is attributed to one of the customers who ordered a ham sandwich. And the owner was cutting the ham, that he cut the slices of ham so thin you could read the newspaper through it. And so the owner was Roderick McDermott, and his son, Tippy McDermott, told Gwen Wyatt of Holly Springs this story, that Tippy knew that his father, cafe owner, had heard this line from one of his customers. You cut the ham so thin you could read the newspaper through it. And then I also heard another version of the same story, that the cafe owner was told, you cut the ham so thin you could go to Chicago on the profits from one ham. And so there's a little legend in there somewhere, I'm not sure exactly which, maybe both. Maybe it was said to the owner quite frequently that he was cutting the ham so thin people barely got enough for lunch, but he got extra money. So this one came to me from Gwen Wyatt, who's, I think, about 100 years old at this point. Her daughter and niece put me in touch with her. She told me the story, and Faulkner put that line, you could read the newspaper through it, in his novel Requiem for a Nun. So I think that Faulkner probably heard this line in the cafe, in the depot, when he changed trains on his way to Memphis. It makes sense, and it fits, and he liked to listen, and I believe that he heard this line in Holly Springs. And this is Reverend George Bitzer, Doctor of Divinity, and I think he is also a possible model for the Reverend Hightower in Faulkner's novel Light in August. And Reverend Hightower put a sign out in his yard that said Gail Hightower, D.D. And in Light in August, someone asks a character, what does D.D. stand for? And Faulkner's other character answers, done damned. So that's pretty sarcastic, and Faulkner wasn't known to be very religious. He did go to church Christmas and Easter, weddings and funerals, and he did talk about Christianity a lot, and Christianity does appear in his novels and in his characters. He's not without religion, but he also was highly critical of certain aspects of religion, especially in this book. And so for him to have a sarcastic reply, or his character to have a sarcastic reply, may indicate his antipathy to Presbyterianism, which this reverend oversaw in Holly Springs, or his antipathy for this particular minister, who was the grandfather of his friend. So those are a few of the ways I think I have found that Faulkner's presence in Holly Springs influenced, or he used them as a source for, some of his stories and novels. There are others. I wrote a whole book about it. There's some others in there, if you're interested. There are more instances that I think are worth considering. So you don't have to believe it, but just for today at least, thank you for considering it. Thank you for coming out today. And thank you, Drew.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have plenty of time for questions, so if you'll raise your hand, I will bring the mic around to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
That was fascinating. Your first reference to a woman was from the book in, I think you said it was Intruder in the Dust.
The Ludi's etching.
And Ludi's etching, that was there. You also made reference to Requiem for a Nun.
Requiem for a Nun.
Yeah. Is that? Do you think Ludi is Temple Drake?
No, I don't think she's Temple Drake. I think there is a reference to the etching by Cecilia. It's not a big part of the book, but it's in there. You know, there's a little short section about an etching on the window, and I think that is a reference to Ludi.
And your reference from Intruder in the Dust, is that, I took it that that was related to a female character. Do you remember the name of the character in the book?
I'll look that one up and get back to you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Is there still a pilgrimage in Holly Springs?
Yes, they disbanded for the COVID years. Also, they have been considering whether to continue it because it focuses on the antebellum South, parts of the antebellum South that are less attractive now than they used to be. They also have started a program called Behind the Big House, which focuses on the slave quarters in town. They've done a lot of work on figuring out who the slaves were who were in each household. Burton Place, for example, folks have worked really hard to discover and find photographs and information about who the slaves were who lived in the slave quarters behind Burton Place. They now have an exhibit there with photos of the people, names, and information about who they were. And so they have a whole thing now going about Behind the Big House is than the pilgrimage. I do think they have restarted the pilgrimage though, but hopefully it's going to be in a modulated form.
Hi, I'm right here. I
Okay.
was gonna ask if you were, like you said, able to prove your theory more definitively of William Faulkner's works being connected in Holly Springs. What do you think that would mean for his legacy?
Well, if I'm right, that photo of the beautiful young girl in the swing at McCarroll Place is the photo that he was looking at that inspired his imagination to come up with the metaphor of the girl in the swing. Would be an important addition to what we know about Faulkner's creative process in formulating one character in the novel. And it's his most famous novel. So if I happen to be right, that would be really cool. And I think it would add a note to Faulkner scholarship to say this could have been the girl.
Are the relatives or descendants of these people aware that there is a similarity to the character that he used these people as inspiration for his characters? Do they have a problem with it, or are they aware of it?
Well, Edgar Francisco III was the man that I found. He was an Emory alumnus from Mississippi, also Georgia Tech alumnus, also Yale PhD, and he was willing to talk to me about the family. I've met some of the other family members. I found a relative of Pearl Strickland, and I've been communicating with her. She's in Florida, and we've had a nice correspondence. She's been willing to share documents and photos. She shared the photo of Pearl Strickland and Ruth Strickland. So yes, the family has been accommodating for the most part, and happy to talk to me and happy to help.
Why did Faulkner need a concrete model instead of taking it out of thin air? And are there other similar ways of assisting with the creative process in Faulkner?
And you sound a lot like him. Your accent is similar. So thank you. That's good. That's you get an A+. Yeah, no, Faulkner did not need a model. I think there are plenty of instances in his works when he did not have models and he imagined things. But also, I think he did draw from the people and the places around him. It's been shown by numerous scholars in various ways that he drew from certain things. He went hunting, for example. He went hunting with groups of men. They would sit around the campfire and drink moonshine out of a glass jar. And then those hunting images would end up in his stories. So that's an example of how he would be doing something and then it would get sort of internalized and he would use it later. And sometimes he used images lots later, like 30 years later. So it's impressive that he would take experiences and save them, sort of remember them, and then later they would come back and they would become part of these full depictions of his town and his county and the counties around him that show up in his works.
Another person who actually lived in Holly Springs that was a very good writer was Ida B. Wells. And I'm wondering if there was any linkages between the two, and or that any influence either way. And I just find that interesting that Holly Springs has these two boats, kind of like two ships almost passing through the night.
Yes, I'm not sure about the cross influence. I'm certain that Miss Wells knew about Faulkner. I can double check and give you a little bit more later. But yes, it's fascinating that the two came out of the same place, and that also happened with Flannery O'Connor and Alice Walker. They lived within few miles of each other, and yet one wrote very, very different fiction than the other, but the echoes are there across currents.
Thank you. Yeah, brilliant research. I was just wondering if in your research were you able to come across anything which would indicate that Faulkner was in any way influenced by black friends or Negro friends or the music, black blues or anything like that? Any kind of influences of music in any way that related to blacks and
Yes.
found in his work?
Yes, I have, and I'll try to answer that fully. Mr. Faulkner wrote about African American people a lot. He wrote about them almost all the time, not in every book, but in many books, and they were the focus of his thinking and feeling for many years. He also had personal friends in his hometown, and there were some African American people who worked with him around his place. He was very close to them, and his mammy, he called her Mammy Callie, was with his family for his whole growing up life, and he went to her when he had problems. She helped him all the time. They had a close relationship, and he gave the eulogy at her funeral in his living room. And he went with her to the cemetery to be buried, and he wrote on her tombstone, for Mammy Callie, her white children bless her. And people have people have different views of that comment. Is that racist to say he was her white child? But I don't think so. I think he loved her and was trying to honor her. But I'd be interested in your reaction to whether that seemed like an offensive comment or a comment made from love and from the heart.
This may be from left field, but 50 years ago when I was in college, my professor, French professor, gave me an assignment to study the Requiem for a Nun by Albert Camus, which was, my understanding was that Camus copied the story and even attempted to copy the Mississippi accents that in French. And I was just wondering, did they ever meet? Or he changed the ending of the play, different from the novel, but or the story of Requiem for a Nun. But I just am interested what you see, how they may be connected. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not certain. I believe they did meet, but I'm not certain. But there's a strong connection between Faulkner and France. They loved him when everybody in America was not interested in all of his hunting stories and his flying stories and his closely held familial inheritance and genealogical stories. Not interested here, but he was being read in France, and Camus was one who was particularly interested. So, and as time has gone on, people in Japan love Faulkner, and so he has appealed to folks across the waters almost more than here.
Were there other... Hello? Can you hear me? Were there other towns besides Holly Springs where he went and got inspiration for characters and stories? I mean, I'm from Tupelo, so I can't imagine that he didn't go down to Tupelo and get a few.
Yes, there are other towns. I mean, Faulkner lived in Mississippi most of his life, except for a few years here and there, and traveled around the state. I interviewed a lady in Greenville, Mississippi. She told me Faulkner had been there. She told me stories. I'll give you one. She said Faulkner came there to go to a party with his photographer friend Bern Keating, and Mr. Faulkner drank too much, as he often did, and he was drunk. And so his friend Bern invited him to stay at the house. And so Faulkner spent the night at the Keating home. And the next morning, Bern Keating got up and went to work, but Mr. Faulkner stayed in bed, and Mrs. Keating felt obligated to fix breakfast for him. So she did and brought him breakfast in bed. And then Mr. Faulkner didn't get up, and then he ended up staying 5 days. And she fixed breakfast for him for 5 days. And finally she told her husband to do something, but she had to go back to work also. And so Bern Keating drove Mr. Faulkner back to Oxford. So that is one story among many of the fact that he was around. He went out of town. He drove, and his biographer Joseph Blattner said that there were times when no one knew where Faulkner was, that he was not in town, he was not at his house, he wasn't in town, but they did not know where he was. So he liked to escape like that and go driving and see what happened.
I want to come back to your comment about the statement on the tombstone.
Yes.
And I think it depends on the times. to speculate on how some people would take it. There was a time when it would have been offensive, and there's another time when it could be considered that it was probably a sincere comment or feeling from him and the family.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to have your opinion. I agree that, to me, it seems like, from what I know about the relationship between the two, it was like mother and son. And I know that was sometimes the case in the South when there was an African-American caregiver. That's not to say it was the right thing. That's not to say it should have happened. It's not to say that Mammy Callie, his particular woman, was happy in her role. We don't know for sure. But we can imagine that she probably would not have chosen that life if she'd had good choices. But that was her life, and he and she got along very well. He seemed to exhibit genuine love for her, and upon her death, he took her almost like a personal embrace to have her funeral in his living room, and he gave the eulogy, and he went with her to the cemetery. He did that for his own daughter who died in infancy. So thank you for giving me your opinion, and a little bit more of an answer to you about Faulkner's characters who were African American. There are numerous, and Faulkner wrote about race at a time when it was not popular to write about racial issues in Mississippi, but he took it on, head on, and you know, I could talk for a long time about that topic, how he depicted people, what situations he depicted, but I'll give you one example. Pantaloon in Black is one of his stories in Go Down Moses, and in that story, an African-American man works at the lumber mill, and his wife dies, and he's overwrought with grief, and he gets drunk, and some of the guys get into a fight, and he cuts somebody, and so there's a lynching. And after the lynching, the sheriff goes home and tells his wife what happened in town today, and she says, "Let's go to the picture show." And I think that is a devastating portrait of racism on the part of the characters. And Mr. Faulkner uses the whole story to build up to this wife, when she hears the news of a hanging, says, "Let's go to the picture show." And so I think Faulkner was depicting her as a racist, and also I think the sheriff, but especially the wife. And so some people say Faulkner was a racist, and it's debatable. It's a complicated topic. But if you take a story like that and you see where he shone the light to magnify the most, it's the death of the man, and then the wife's callous attitude.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I have two questions.
Okay.
Where was Faulkner from, and how many of his books have been made into a movie?
Okay. Well, he was born in New Albany, Mississippi, but his family moved to Ripley and then Oxford, and he mostly grew up in Oxford and spent most of his life there. He lived in New Orleans for a while and got some training from Sherwood Anderson, the novelist, And Sherwood Anderson told him, write about what you know. And so he went home. He took Anderson's advice, and he went home to Mississippi, to Oxford, and he started writing about the people around him and the life that he knew. And that was really good advice that he got, and it worked perfectly for him for the rest of his life. Movies, I have a chart of a list of all the movies, but there were numerous, maybe 6 or 8 or so, that people made movies out of his stories. And they're still going. Somebody did a rendition of As I Lay Dying lately, and a new film about him. So there's still enough interest that kind of activity is still going.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's give Sally a round of applause. Thank you for this incredibly informative presentation today. We have copies of William Faulkner in Holly Springs just to the left of the stage. We'd invite you guys to pick up a copy, have Sally sign it for you, ask her any questions you didn't get a chance to. And then we hope to see you back with us again. Next week, we'll have Melody Golding with us for her presentation on Mississippi Voices from Hurricane Katrina. Just as a reminder, the Hurricane Katrina exhibit is only open for exactly 1 more month before it comes down. So make sure if you have not seen it or you have friends or family that you'd like to be able to see it, that exhibit is free anytime. Just tell the folks at the front desk you're here to see the exhibit. We'd love for you to be able to make it up there and see that, and then come back and join us again for Melody next